So the last thing I want to do this week, kind of to help you out a little bit, is to explain again what it looks like to process through some higher level articles. So, for instance, on Wednesday next week, it's suggested that you read and analyze two of the following articles and provide a rough summary of the key points on Flipgrid, and then kind of challenge and extend the author's insights. So I wanted to kind of go through some of those with you to give you an idea of what that would look like and how you might do it. So we read scholarly articles, obviously, to see like what do other people say about the book, what other angles are there in terms of interpreting the text that maybe you didn't think about. So I'll just pull up a few of them right now, and like I said, you just choose two. And the first thing I would suggest to that you're interested in. So like flip through all of them. If you open them, like this one is about Gatsby and the way we live now. So if you're interested in how it connects, if you kind of like skim a few of the articles, a few of the paragraphs, it's going to give you a little bit of a concept of what this is about. And so like if we just look at the beginning, it says not long before he died, a celebrated conjurer whose beautifully simple yet seemingly impossible tricks had earned him admiration of his fellow magicians. He was asked if there's anything he wanted, and he said, well, I wish someone could fool me one more time. That magician's confession came back to my mind when I reread The Great Gatsby. The novel about the magnetically attractive millionaire can be read as a story of the jazz age and a comment on the corruption of the American dream. And tangled into this tragic love story is sort of this trauma of the lost generation that emerged after the World War I veterans had come back. And Fitzgerald distills a picture of how American hopes of making a new start in history were derailed by a culture whose energy was spun off from crime and fraud. So if you're interested in more of like the 1920s culture, maybe the returning war vets, that sort of thing, then this would be something you would want to look at. This one in particular, sorry they all have lots of ads, but it talks about the relation to and importance as a work of art. So if you like art and you're interested in kind of the symbolism, illusion, irony, ambiguity that the book accomplishes in more of an artistic form, it's going to look at the descriptions, the opulence of the dresses, the beautiful, rich young women like Daisy who receive a lot of attention. The men are modestly handsome. The women are well-bred and beautiful. So it's going to look at the imagery embedded in the text and kind of the descriptive nature of that. This article looks at the telephonic logic of The Great Gatsby. So literally it's going to look at the telephone and how the telephone interrupts the flow of the plot and sort of acts or functions as a character at really crucial times. So, Myrtle manages to crash the party from a distance using the telephone, and Gatsby's parties and are constantly interrupted by the phone as it's calling him to some sort of a distant business transaction. And so it's going to talk about how the novel presents and a narrator imagined within a system of new technologies and how that technology at the time was new and how it began to kind of impact the events of the novel for the worse. So interesting. And then The Great Gatsby line that came from Fitzgerald's life, an inspired novel, is going to look at the biography of Fitzgerald himself and how some of the events were actually inspired by his real world experiences. So you can look at like his relationship with his wife and some of the other affair type culture things that happened. The comment here being that I hope she'll be a fool, a beautiful little fool. And he stole these words out of his wife's mouth, or out of a letter in which he jotted down the words that his wife said while she was floating on waves of ether as she learned the sex of her child. She said, so that's what his wife had said about their daughter. And so this one will talk a little bit about like the nature of those. So when it asks you to provide a rough summary of the key points, you'll look at the articles and you'll like obviously jot down, I would say, in your own notes kind of what the key ideas are. And then what you'll do when it says to challenge or extend the author's insights, you might pick like this one, which is the telephone one. And you might like, so to further says like, yeah, okay, the author mentions like the telephone does this, the telephone does this, the telephone does this, but I also see that it does this. So you're going to add to the author's arguments, kind of just assuming like this is really good as is, but I would add a couple more things. To challenge, you might say like, that's kind of not what I think the phone is doing in this case. I don't think that the phone is actually interrupting. I think that the phone is providing an opportunity for society to flourish, and that people have always been corrupt by nature, but it's the technology is just kind of making that more overt. So that's something that I would encourage you to think about. How could you further the article and add to it and contribute to what it's also saying? Or you could just kind of like stifle it and say, I disagree with these claims and this is why. So that's what you're being asked to do on that. And all of this is to extend your ability to kind of think critically about something and to get outside of your comfort zone and read things that are a little bit more in depth. The reason I'm requiring you to mention all of the different plot points from the articles is that I want to see that you're actually reading them and that you can persevere through something difficult. Like I said, these are not as in depth as some scholarly journals, but you kind of get the gist of it this way. So I guess I also want to say, don't read word for word. That's not expected. The first thing that I do when I go over a scholarly article is I read kind of the key points. And then, so for instance, I'd look at this paragraph and I read the first sentence. Nick's presentation of Daisy does reveal just how reflective he could be about the question of individual responsibility. Okay, so he's going to be talking about, is Daisy taking responsibility for her own actions, or does she tend to push them off onto somebody else as their fault or their problem? And my automatic thought is, I'm pretty sure Daisy doesn't take responsibility for anything. So now that I kind of have that understanding, I'm going to keep reading to see if the author kind of goes that direction or takes a different turn. Significantly, he portrays Daisy as sharing both his notion of female powerlessness and his acceptance of deception as an appropriate way to deal with powerlessness. So what this author is saying is that Daisy is a victim. She's not in control, and her way to deal with victimization is to deceive other people. In contrast, you see, in contrast to Gatsby, who saw marriage to Daisy as being the material manifestation of his having achieved success, Daisy subscribes to the version of a dream that applies to women. That marriage to a successful man is not the symbol of success, but it is success itself. She never questions the concept that her only choices are among suitors. Even her single attempt to defy convention, her plan to join Gatsby in New York before he goes overseas with the army, is to keep with her belief that her happiness depends on her having a relationship with a successful man. She's unaware that Gatsby has deceived her about his financial status. And as Nick recounts it, Gatsby had deliberately given Daisy a sense of security. He let her believe that he was a person from much the same stratum as herself, and that he was fully able to take care of her. What this is saying is that Daisy had, even in her moment of seeming authenticity, when she agrees to like run away with Gatsby, she turns around and goes home when she realizes that he didn't have the financial stability that he said he did. And so she was deceptive in her powerlessness, and her powerlessness required that, because the only way for a woman to be successful was to be connected to a successful man. I'm sure that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you because it's kind of a complex concept, but again, get through that paragraph and then move on. I pick out like interesting white girlhood. What is white girlhood? What about the pearls that cost $350,000? So go through, skim, don't read the entire thing word for word. And then if you're unclear on a particular point, you go back and look at it more in depth. So that's what's expected from this article analysis.